So I went from one professor that got me to go to law school and another professor that hired me out of law school. But for those two people, I don't know where I'd be.
Welcome to the Tip the Scales podcast, where we discuss running and growing your law firm. I'm your host, Maria Monroy, president and co-founder of LawRank. Today, I am joined by Kevin Biniazan. Kevin is super impressive. He's 32 years old, owns a law firm with 6 partners, 13 lawyers, recently got a verdict for $360 million. It was a sexual abuse case, so we talked about that. He has an undergrad business degree, so he's super, super, super impressive. I've been trying to interview him for like a year, so I'm super excited that I finally got him on the show, and I hope that you guys enjoy this episode. Kevin.
Maria.
I can't pronounce your last name.
Biniazan.
Biniazan.
That's good.
I did it.
You did it.
Okay, perfect. I sound like my kids. I did it because that's what I teach them to say. I did it.
That is an exercise that I've become familiar with, getting people to say my last name correctly.
Really?
So I take no offense to it.
Okay. Well, English is my second language, so you can't even take offense to it.
Me too.
Oh, what's your first language?
Farsi.
Okay, and Spanish.
There you go.
You don't have an accent.
I don't. All of my home videos growing up, probably before the age of 4, 5, everyone's talking Farsi. And then I have older siblings though, so I learned English
From them?
Yeah, in between, from my parents and from them. And then, once as school age progresses, the amount of Farsi we spoke at home went away.
But you still speak it?
Yeah, I try to. I don't remember as much as I used to.
Okay, but you were like born here?
Yes.
Okay, see, I wasn't, so I win.
That you do win.
Thank you. A lawyer yesterday was like, you have the best Mexican accent I've ever heard. I was like, thank you.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, I didn't know what to say. I was like, okay.
Is a Mexican accent just Spanish?
Yeah, I was very confused. I'm like, are you trying to tell me I don't have an accent? But all right, tell us a little bit about you, firm's name, what you do, all of that, how old you are.
Yeah, you threw that one in there.
Yeah, I did.
Our firm name is Breit Biniazan. We're based in Virginia. We also have an office in Phoenix, Arizona, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Tempe, Arizona, which is like a suburb, but really the same mesh of the valley. Moved cross country to go to law school at William & Mary in Virginia, which is where I met Jeffrey Breit, who was my law professor and trial advocacy coach in law school. And Jeffrey had the wise or unwise decision to hire me out of law school. So I started practicing with him in 2017 when I graduated law school, and have been with him ever since. And our firm, it was his firm. I took over in January of 2022. And
so 5 years after law school.
Correct. And
that's crazy. Congrats. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah. 32 years old, to answer your last question.
You're a baby lawyer that owns a really successful law firm. Trial firm.
Correct.
Yeah.
Importantly, trial firm.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would never want to not say that when we have a trial lawyer here.
No, it's awesome, but I think I said before we started running, I believe nothing great can be achieved in a vacuum or alone, and we have an amazing team and an amazing group of lawyers, and
you said 6 partners, 13 lawyers?
13 lawyers.
That's awesome.
If somebody quizzes me on that, I'm going to feel really bad if that number's wrong.
Okay, give or take by 1, guys.
Yes. Yeah, no, we are, I don't know how best to say it. We're eclectic, and in a way that no one person, I think, in the firm is the same, and in the best way possible, because I think we complement each other in ways that are super effective, and ultimately that has really led to a lot of recent success. And if you think of our firm as being potentially 2 years old in terms of the new iteration of it, starting in January of 2022, although the firm started in its true name back in the 80s when Jeffrey, who's my partner, was, sort of launched it himself.
It seems like you had a really good experience with your professors.
Yes.
Because I remember a story you told me at TLU. Can you tell it?
Sure. This is about my undergraduate professor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I grew up with no lawyers in my family, or really, it's hard when you think back at what you remember, but I don't remember ever meeting a lawyer, honestly, until I was in undergraduate in college, and I went to Grand Canyon University in Phoenix before anybody knew what it was or before it was ever in the NCAA tournament. And I was a business student, and while I was there was a professor I had who was a retired trial lawyer, and he moved down to the Valley from Ohio, and luck would have it, he was teaching a business law course that I took. And he structured the course in this way where we were broken up into firms, and he would teach a topic, and then you would have to sort of present the topic or argue or sort of put on your case, so to speak, in a hypothetical. And I would do that for my firm because I thought it was fun. I would be the one that would get up and sort of present our case every week or every other week, however he structured it. And he, after a few weeks, I don't remember how long it took, pulled me aside and said or asked me that to try out or be part of the trial team, which I had no idea what that was. But I guess there was a moot trial team or a mock trial team at the university. And I sort of blew him off. I was a soccer player at the time, and I thought I got a lot of other stuff to do. My hair was much longer than it even is now. And I was much more into college than I was about what was going to come after college. But he was persistent and ultimately inspired me and handed me a Jerry Spence book that semester. Yeah. Yeah. And
wow.
So he handed me the book, How to Argue and Win Every Time. I remember it vividly. And I remember reading it that summer and that spring. It was a winter semester, so spring semester. And he said to me at the end of the semester, he said, you need to be a lawyer.
Wow.
And so
Are you still in touch with this professor?
I am. Yeah. I still text him. He actually moved back to Virginia. So weirdly, we both now live primarily in Virginia. He still goes back to Phoenix like I do. And so we still keep in touch. We grab a beer or lunch and trade text messages. And yeah, he changed my life, no doubt about it. And so did Jeffrey. So I went from one professor that got me to go to law school and another professor that hired me out of law school. But for those two people, I don't know where I'd be.
That's crazy because so many people have the opposite experience where I think they're so tainted by like elementary, middle, high school days and like just having bad teachers that don't care. Right? Like I see it even with my kids sometimes when they've had a bad teacher, how much like that impacts it, and like kind of undoing the damage of that one bad teacher can take a while. Right? Now, I also remember you telling me that whenever your friends would get in trouble.
Oh my God.
Tell us this.
I forgot. I told you all that.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. And well, once the news traveled amongst my friend group in college that I was planning on going to law school, I was de facto the defense lawyer whenever people got in trouble on campus. And so we would have, it was a private university, and as a private university, they had sort of private police or security, and they really enforced a lot of rules within the system. And being a student athlete, the student athletes didn't always follow those rules.
Yeah.
That they wanted to enforce. And so from time to time, student life would get somebody in trouble. And I would get the text message. And sometimes it was friends, sometimes it was random people that had talked to a friend and be like, hey, I got this student life issue. Can you help me out or whatever? And there's a one time where a group of us got in trouble and had to go to student life, and me and still one of my best friends sort of brought the group in. There's 6 or 7 of us guys, and we said, look, when we go in there, nobody answers a question. Only we talk. And we sat down in a room and we're being asked questions by student life at our private university. And I sat down at the table and answered all the questions. And I just remember them asking us to sort of rat on other people. And I was a good lawyer then. I instructed my clients not to cave.
Did you enjoy this?
I loved it.
Okay, so that's like, at that point, did you know, okay, my professor's right? Like,
yeah, I think what did it for me is that, as an athlete growing up, there's a feeling you get when you sort of step onto a field, in my case, soccer, and you feel like the lights are on and you have to perform and actually achieve something. And there's resistance. And what I mean by the resistance, it's like the person on the other side is actually trying to get you to not do well or to beat you, and you're trying to succeed. And you may call it competition, but it's that feeling of, I have to impose myself or my will or my own, whatever you want to call it, onto this and win. And there was nothing else in the educational world, talk about school, business. I was a business student, that really gave me that feeling until I started arguing in that business law class and getting excited for Friday arguments of just winning.
What position did you play?
In soccer?
Yeah.
I was a defender growing up and a defensive midfielder in college. So I was mostly a center back as a kid.
Okay. One of my kids plays soccer. He's a goalie, though. He has to give me heart attacks.
Yeah.
And if they lose the game, he's in the worst mood possible.
Right.
The rest of the
everyone
day.
Blames him.
But I'm like, the ball had to go through your whole team and then to get to you. And he has no fear. The other day he lunged for the ball. I was like, they were kicking there. They would have kicked, they were this far from kicking you in the head. Why would you do that?
Well,
that's what you do.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with this.
Goalkeepers always have a little screw loose.
He does. Oh, 1,000%. I'm like, my husband and I are where did he get this from? A ball's coming at us. We're running the other way. He just lunges. He's so brave. I'm like, he likes contact though.
Right. Makes you feel alive.
I worry with him.
I was that way. I used to tell myself before games that I had to really get into a tackle early and just feel it, because then it jolts you and gets you to feel okay, I'm in the game now.
You guys are crazy. I never did any exercise or anything until 4 years ago. Nothing. Zero. So I don't get it. I never played any sports or I didn't do anything. So
well, it's a good habit to learn. I'm happy to hear that you're learning the habit.
Well, now I go to the gym religiously 5 times a week, but before then I didn't. That was more of an age thing that I was like, okay, it's time. Anyways, okay. Now let's talk about the types of cases that you try. What are you known for? Which verdicts? What types of cases?
Good question. Most recently we had a child sexual abuse case that we tried this fall to verdict and had a great outcome.
What was the outcome?
$360 million.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
No, it was...
But could you collect on it?
We expect to, yes.
This was against who?
The hospital. It was a hospital and a hospital facility and a medical director at that facility who sexually abused our 3 clients that had gone to trial in that case. And we represent more than 40 others. And so it's not going to end anytime soon, in my view, and nor do I want it to. I think if folks on the other side still want to deny the truth of what really happened here, and we have to continue to expose it in trials, then that's what we'll do.
So let's back up. First of all, how did you get this case? And how did you end up with 3 clients from the same hospital? Like, did one refer the other, or?
No, not referral in terms of between them. The case started for me, it was back in 2020, right before like the COVID shutdown. And I received a call about a mother whose child was at this hospital. It was a children's hospital.
And how did she find you?
Through a lawyer that I knew in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And she asked me about, really, the conversation started in terms of what possible options that she had for her son. And her son had been physically abused at the facility.
What did he go in for initially?
I don't want to divulge too much of his health care, but
Isn't this public record?
some of it is.
Okay.
So
whatever's public, I guess.
so he initially, so the facility is a adolescent facility, children and adolescent facility, but they hold themselves out as being a residential facility in all of the beds, so to speak. And they essentially market for kids or children who have psychiatric complications or disabilities, or who are severely or moderately autistic, who require behavioral intervention. And he was one of those children who required behavioral intervention. And he was not there for long. His mother was extremely active in his life, but needed help, like a lot of families do in this, dealing with those circumstances. And when she went in to check on him after a few days, realized that he was bruised and battered, really, and took him out against their medical advice.
How old was he at the time?
He was under the age of 10.
I'm going to cry.
The specific age, I don't know.
That's fucking horrible.
Yeah. So
And is he verbal?
he's nonverbal.
Can he communicate on like a,
He communicates well with his mother. And
what do you mean?
in other words, they've come up with a mechanism, and it's morphed over time as he's aged.
Like, can he type on an iPad or no?
I don't know if he can right now.
Okay.
Because I know before he could not. In other words, that wasn't a form of communication that they used. But that's really where my involvement in it started, but that's not where it ended, because it was looking into this facility that I learned that there were allegations of sexual abuse against the medical director, because that was different than what this family had initially told me, or that this family was talking about in terms of what happened to their son. And right around that time, there was a news article that came out in the local press in Richmond, Virginia, about the medical director being placed on administrative leave based on accusations of sexual abuse. And our involvement sort of investigating the case led to other phone calls from people who found out that we were sort of looking into the facility to see if there was a potential legal action that could be brought against them. And one thing led to another. And by October of that year, we had filed a case on behalf of 20 former patients of the facility.
So in this, and excuse my ignorance, in this particular scenario, you can reach out to the patients?
No, we didn't directly. And
Okay.
what ultimately happened, as far as I know, because I wasn't involved in all the sort of communications in terms of how people found us. My understanding is that as we proceeded in representing the mother of this autistic child, she, through community of others who were sort of sharing experiences that they or their children had at the facility, shared that she had hired myself and our firm in order to pursue the case for her child. And as a result of that, and learning that our firm was involved to represent her, other people started contacting us directly.
That makes sense.
And then and that led to sort of a lot of late night conversations and long drives to try and figure out what was really going on here. And ultimately so when we tried the case in September of this year, it was on behalf of 3 of the clients. It wasn't on behalf of the young boy that was the first client. On behalf of 3 of the clients who were female, who alleged that the medical director had sexually abused them when they were admitted to the facility back in essentially 2016, 2017, when they were 14 and 15 years old.
And are all these kids nonverbal?
No, not all of them, but some of them are.
Okay. Because that's tough to communicate if you're...
Very.
Yeah.
And look, ultimately, what's the most frustrating and what's frustrating is a nice word for this. What's scary about it is that these children who were at this place were the most vulnerable amongst us, and not just in their personal circumstance in terms of their mental status or their ability to communicate or not, but also they come from very low socioeconomic circumstances, oftentimes from broken homes or from foster care. And so even if they can speak, they oftentimes have no one to speak to that will listen to them. And that's what made this such a difficult thing to absorb and swallow, and has been difficult for our firm emotionally to go through. And it's taken an emotional toll, I think, on everyone who's touched it, but it's necessary. It's the right thing to do for them.
That's crazy. What did you learn when you tried this case in terms of trial? Was there anything that you're like, oh, okay?
Yeah, it was a 3-week trial, so it was a longer one for me. And one thing that I think I learned is that there are ebbs and flows in a case of that duration, and you have to sort of ride the wave. And what I mean by that is, when we were planning what witnesses to call, what order to call them in, what we were trying to get out of different people in order to try and put on this case, you're taking this gigantic circumstance that is sprawling, because this man was there for 40 years. And so there's evidence galore that goes back decades. And you sort of have to give like a little peephole of information to this jury to try and express everything in 3 weeks, right? 30 years in 3 weeks. And I think what I have taken away from it, one major thing is you have to make sure you understand the journey you're taking these jurors on, and not give them too much of one thing at any point in time. And what I mean by that is, there were tears shed in this courtroom. There are tears shed almost every day by the jurors, sometimes by other people in the courtroom. But if you're crying all day, that becomes a really difficult thing for people, for jurors, for any human being to live through and to stay engaged in, because nobody wants to feel that way all day. You watch a movie that makes you emotional. You appreciate that moment that you're emotional for 15 minutes, but you don't want to cry through a 2-hour movie.
It's very draining to cry.
Planning and trying to actually be strategic in, okay, well, what are we trying to do we have to teach something today. We have to teach them about how billing fraud works, because part of the case was fraudulent activity of the hospital that really was the only reason that these girls ever went there, because they never should have been there to begin with. And so you have to teach them about billing fraud. Okay, well then how do you teach them about billing fraud, and then also remind them that what we're really here for is a horrific act of abuse? And so if it makes sense, or if I'm making any sense, this riding of the wave of information to make sure that you're not information overload or emotional overload on any given day or any given afternoon or morning is a big takeaway from me. And ultimately, we think it was effective.
But when did you realize this? Were you aware of this before trial? Like, hey, this is going to make people cry nonstop. So I have to be really careful, like, to not make them so emotional that by the fourth day, they're like, fuck this, I'm checked out. Like, I cannot, like, it's just too painful to go through it. And then you can't think straight. And then you're like, I can already see how I would struggle with this, right? Or was it like day 3 that you're like, shit, we need to change our strategy? Like, this is not going to, like, did you know beforehand or after?
I think it was both. I think we anticipated that was going to be, we anticipated enough to plan the first few days with that in mind. But even as we got through the first few days, there are witnesses that we were planning to call that I would consider were going to be more emotional. Family members of our clients or other abuse victims, to demonstrate the fact that the hospital knew that this was going on. We had plans to call other witnesses that we expected would lead to a more emotional response, that we, on the fly, as we were going through the trial, said, we're not going to do that. Let's pull that person back because it's too much right now. And so it was both. I think we were aware of it going in, but that in the process, we were responsive to the mood of the actual courtroom. And so we internally sort of joked that we would have mornings where we're like, no tears, right? Like, we're not, this is a morning without tears. We're just hitting concrete issues and facts and trying to do it in a super compelling way, which is, I think, the most important thing, so that it's retained. And then you can get to some of the emotional stuff. But we started, to give you a short answer to the question, we had an idea that we had to do this, but it really started to play out in practice that required us to still pivot and make decisions on the fly and change our strategy even as we were going through it.
Now, was this your first sexual abuse case?
Not my first sexual abuse case. It was my first sexual abuse trial. Yeah.
And is this something you're going to specialize in now?
I love this work. And so if somebody wants to say it's a specialty of mine, I'm happy to wear that moniker. And it's something that I would love to be part of more. It's a huge part of our firm's practice and has been for a few years now.
Okay.
And so, I've represented, in my 7 years that we've pointed out, I've represented more than 100 sexual abuse survivors.
Oh, wow.
And so it's been part of my practice really since the first year, which is when I first got involved in a case involving childhood sexual abuse, my first year practice. And I hope and expect it will be into the future until these issues hopefully aren't occurring as much. And that's oftentimes what I tell a client or a potential client that calls, and that I say, look, I love what I do. I love being able to represent people who are in your circumstance, but I hope someday I don't have to anymore. Not because I'm going to stop, even though it's still happening, but because I hope someday the folks who are responsible for creating environments that ultimately result in these actions take action before you ever have to go through this, so you never have to call me. I don't want the calls anymore. I don't want to have to deal with it, deal with that trauma of somebody else, in the sense of I don't want it to exist. But for as long as it exists, I'll do it because I think it's the right thing to do.
I mean, I wish it didn't exist, but I don't think that's,
Right.
I don't think it's going to go away.
Right.
Now, did you, like, were you hoping for this amount? Like, what were you shooting for?
Honestly,
Yeah.
it was more important to our clients that somebody said, we believe you, than it was for somebody to say X amount of money.
I've heard this before from lawyers that I think Taylor Dordick said this to me once.
Yeah.
I want to say it was her, maybe not, but I'm pretty sure it was.
And so going into the trial, we'd sued for $20 million per girl for compensatory damages. So
Okay.
in Virginia, you have to actually ask for a specific amount of money when you file a lawsuit. It can't be open-ended. And so for each girl, we asked for $20 million per girl, per client. And when we were in front of the jury, because of the fraud aspect of this case that I alluded to earlier, the jury on their election could what's called treble the damages. They could multiply it by 3 if they deemed that the conduct was willful and wanton, that they intentionally committed or knew that they were committing this fraud. And then they could allow for punitive damages. And so in closing argument, I asked the jury to return the $20 million as requested, which is what we sued for. I asked them to treble the damages, and which would make it 60 plus the 20, so a total of 80. And then I left it to them and said, you do whatever you think is right in relation to the punitive damages. And they ultimately decided that $40 million per girl was the right number for that, which is how they got to $120 million per client for a total of $360 million. So to answer your question in fewer words, they did exactly what we asked of them. So in the sense of, did I expect it? Or is this what I was looking for going in? In a way, yes, because it is what we asked them to do. But it wasn't, that number was not something I went into trial going, I want a 9-figure verdict in this case. I went into this trial saying, I want these girls to walk out, our clients to walk out of that courtroom and say, finally people believe me. And when we were in the lobby of the courthouse after the verdict, there were jurors who waited for our clients to come down the elevator to hug them and embrace them. And so that was everything.
We're both crying.
Sorry. I started crying.
No,
I
think I started. I just can't imagine. Like, the whole thing is like so fucked up. But I'm glad someone's doing the work so that at least people think twice before. Like, there's more to lose, right?
Right.
Because I guess this is like, here's my ignorance again. How new are these like sexual abuse cases?
I don't think they're new. I think that our industry is paying more attention to them, as we should.
You mean the PI space?
Right.
Okay.
So
and some laws changed, right? At some point in time.
It's had a huge effect in a positive way, because historically, in almost every state, if not every state, if you experienced childhood sexual abuse, you had until you were 20 years old to bring a civil case. You had 2 years
You're still a child
Right.
at 20 years old.
Right. You had 18, you had 2 years to make a decision.
That's crazy.
And all of the science tells us, all the studies tell us that is virtually impossible to expect. Not only somebody to open up about it within 2 years, but to feel like they're ready to do something about it within 2 years.
That makes sense.
And so, Child USA, which is a great organization, compiled sort of a lot of research and a document that talks about delayed disclosures, which is this topic and how it's studied. And the average disclosure of a woman who's experienced childhood sexual abuse is in their 50s.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and it makes sense.
Right. And so really the laws in most states, even in Virginia, is still not up with the science, if you want to think of it that way.
So what's the law now?
In Virginia, you have 20 years from your 18th birthday to bring a civil claim, or you have 20 years from the date that a medical provider informs you that a condition or a diagnosis, a mental health condition or diagnosis, is causally related to childhood sexual abuse. And the point of that is to say, okay, it may not be until you're 42 that you actually go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist who starts to discover and discuss with you your experiences as a child. And it's not until then that you realize I'm suffering from a major depressive disorder, or I'm suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or I'm suffering from chronic anxiety. And I never knew that it was because of these experiences that I had when I was 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 15, pick the number. I never knew it until the doctor told me, because of course we don't know those things, right? That's not what, that's why they go to school and education, to be able to tie those two things together and be able to communicate those things. So the purpose of that kind of a law is to give people extra time once they find out that this is something that they're experiencing, to process it.
Makes sense.
So there are some states that have done a wonderful job, I believe, and just abolished statutes of limitations for childhood sexual abuse entirely and said, we're not going to impose a limitation. Now, and then there are other states that are still lagging behind and who haven't really changed their laws to give these people this opportunity to seek justice. And so there's two things. I think the opportunity to bring the cases in recent years, as the law has changed, has given now adults who suffered childhood sexual abuse to come forward and be able to do something about it.
And are you getting a lot of those cases?
We are, yeah. And so...
And how do you, I guess this is like just me being curious, like so much time has passed, like how do you prove that?
Yeah, that's sort of what I was going to allude to, which is these laws are great in terms of giving the opportunity, but the age-old legal theory that, evidence wanes in time still is true. It is much, in a technology age, it's becoming much easier, quote unquote, to do so. If you're litigating a case that an abuse happened in the 80s, it's harder because people weren't emailing about what was going on. How do you prove who knew what when? And you deal with aging memories and unfortunately folks who are deceased or who are passing, who had information who you can't now question because they've passed away. But so the answer is it's not an easy task, but there are tools, and it's I always describe to a client, it's like peeling back layers of an onion. You have to do it one layer at a time, because if you chop it and just sit in the onion, you're going to cry, and it's too much to process, and you got to step away. And so you really have to go step by step and say, okay, who do you know? Who did you talk to? Who did you share this with? Or who is the pastor's friend?
Is it usually a Catholic thing?
Or a lot of our
church?
work are religious entities.
That's so scary.
Yeah.
It's so hypocritical. I can't.
Well, they have to appreciate any youth-serving organization.
YMCA,
right? Religious entities.
What's the other
children's
one?
Hospitals, Boy Scouts. All of these, and there's tons of them. Daycare centers, schools, right? Those youth-serving organizations have to appreciate that you're not only a place where you're supposed to be protecting these children, you're also, by the nature of the work that you do, you're an attractive place for the types of people who want to commit these acts.
Yeah.
And so you have to guard against it. you can't just react to it. And that's what we see most often is this idea that, oh, that's never going to happen here.
How do you guard against it though?
You can look the industry's come up with great tools.
Are there organizations that?
Yes.
Okay.
So, in 2007, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, actually put out a standards guideline for youth serving organizations, tools and tactics and strategies to protect children. Things like, lines of sight. They talk about if you have a church and you have a youth room,
put a camera in there. Like, I just feel like with technology now, it's like so many daycares have that now where like you can see your kid at any time. Like there are cameras.
But even having it like having windows or glass windows on the room that's youth serving, making sure that it's not a winding hallway that's tucked away, and so somebody can easily go down that way alone with a child, enforcing rules that no one adult can be with one child at a time. So there are suggested and standards on ratios, which is, okay, you have an overnight event with 5 children. Well, you need at least 2 adults for that. Okay, you want 8 children, 3 adults for that. There are standards there so that you can guard and take the appropriate measures, because really the word used often in this space about the people who commit these acts is predator. And it's a good word. Okay?
But
they are opportunistic predators. It is very rare a predator creates their own environment for prey. And I hate to use this metaphor in this capacity, but it's a good metaphor to explain this. A true predator creates an environment for their prey, which is, I am going to lure somebody into my own personal environment and commit an act. Where these acts happen most often is where somebody, what we will call an opportunistic assailant or an opportunistic perpetrator, is looking for the easiest access point to children. They're not out there coming up with the daycare center. They're not starting the Boy Scouts of America. They're not inventing an industry or a practice where they're creating the business for the children to come in. They go out and they say, you're a church? Well, your church doesn't background check. Your church doesn't require time away from children when I first joined the church. You're going to let me go on field trips with them on day 2? That's where I want to go, because there's less restriction on what I can do, and I will have a greater opportunity to commit these acts. And so these companies, these entities, these organizations need to be limiting the opportunity. Instead of saying that's a bad apple, he's a predator, he's going to do what he was going to do regardless. It's not just us. He was going to do it anywhere. It's a bullshit position to take. If you're a youth serving organization, you need to be committed to knowing that it's not going to happen under your roof or on your watch or with your children. Not to say this guy's a terrible monster, he's going to do it regardless of where he finds the children. Because oftentimes these people won't go out and find the circumstance unless the opportunity is presented to them. And that's what needs to be limited, is the opportunity and changed. And that is an institutional issue. It's not a predator issue.
What I don't get is like this place that you just sued, right? Like, I assume multiple people work there. Like, did anybody ever come out, like report?
Yeah.
They did?
Yes. So.
And the police nobody did anything?
So the police investigated him in 2017 and took it to the Commonwealth attorney, so the district attorney in the small town. It's in a small community in Virginia, the hospital is. And they declined to pursue the case.
Why?
Because
They're busy? I mean,
there's literature in this space that talks about how organizations need to be aware of what's called a nice guy offender. A nice guy offender is a term coined by Ken Lanning, who is an FBI detective and behavioral scientist. And the idea is oftentimes these acts committed by people who are in positions of authority, like a medical director, like a pastor, like a youth pastor, like a Boy Scouts leader, these positions come with them some sort of authority level where people go, he would never do that. Look how much he's committed his whole life to being a physician. He would never do something like that. And they look the other way. They give the accused assailant the benefit of the doubt, which is when you ask yourself, what does our society want to be committed to? If it's truly the safety of a child, then every benefit of the doubt needs to be given to a child that's coming forward in this circumstance in order to investigate it and do everything you can.
Right.
And so that's really what happens. And people don't look into it the way that they should. They don't do the proper investigations. They think that would never happen here. And that's the type of thing that allows it to perpetuate. So yeah, people do come forward. Good people do good things. And
that's good to know.
Yeah, good people.
Because somebody at some point in time must have seen something and spoke up. And if not, we're in trouble as a society, period.
But good people also do bad things, right? And
what do you mean by that?
When you do this kind of work, what you realize is that there are good people in this world who work at hospitals, who work at churches, who do not mean to be part of the problem, but they don't know better. They haven't been trained better. They give the benefit of the doubt when they shouldn't. It doesn't make those people bad people, is my point. They are still good people, but they've done bad things. They've made bad choices, and they've weighed the interest of, I don't want to destroy the reputation of this doctor as compared to, I need to protect this child. And so, when we handle these kinds of cases, I think there's a list that we make. That's called the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right. The good are the people within the organization that we think are good and that they did good things.
Do you present that to the jury? Do you share all that?
I've never called it the good, the bad, and the ugly to a jury.
I'm saying that.
Yes.
Is it something psychological? You want to point out that there were good people? Is it to seem more reasonable? What's the...
Yeah, I think, look, you can't go in front of a jury and say, this hospital employed 100 people and they're all terrible people except for 2 people. It's totally unreasonable.
Yeah.
Now, we can accept the fact that there are ugly people in this world that make bad decisions for bad reasons and are covering up, right? There's almost always a cover up. And the parts of these cases is finding the cover up, because the cover up is really where you realize how rotten to the core an organization truly might be.
Is that the ugly?
That's the ugly.
What's the bad?
The bad are the people who knew better. This is a line I use at trial. They knew better, but they didn't do better. They had every reason to know. They had every indication to know that this was happening. They heard the warnings. The girls told them about it. They saw things that really weren't appropriate, but they didn't act on it. The good are the people that see things and do things. See something, say something. The bad are the knew better, didn't do better. And the ugly are the cover-ups.
Okay, so tell me what's next for you.
Well, both in Virginia and elsewhere, I'm involved in cases like this.
Do people bring you in?
Yeah. So I have trials coming up in 2025 that involve youth serving organizations, both in Virginia and in Arizona, where we practice, in other states across the country that, we're excited to be part of, to try and do what's right, like I've talked about. Our work, I think I said this earlier, is also very eclectic. I enjoy a practice area that isn't just one thing.
What else do you guys do?
We do toxic tort litigation. So we are involved in maritime work because in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, we're close to the water. We have partners who handle medical malpractice and nursing home cases. And so we, as a group, we are spread out across different areas of specialty. And for me, I focus on, preparing and trying the next case. And it could be a nursing home case in January, or it could be a case involving Amazon in February. It could be a case involving sexual assault at a massage facility in March, or a case involving sexual abuse at a religious institution in April, which is legitimately my calendar for next year. And
who runs the business? Like, who does the business side of things? Because what's interesting about this is your undergrad is in business.
Correct.
Which I'd argue most lawyers, no offense, guys, but not really business minded. Some are.
Yeah. I'm the managing partner of the firm. So I work through the operations, but I do it with help.
Okay.
We have a firm administrator that's wonderful, that's been with us for a long time, that is truly my right hand in executing a lot of our stuff. We work with, we have a marketing director.
Okay.
Who helps with those decisions and execution of sort of the firm's vision, and making sure that we're not only doing great things, but hopefully people learn about the great things we're doing so that we can do more of it. And so we, it's a balance. It's a balance I'm still learning.
Yeah, it's a lot. I always say that it's really hard to be good at one of those two things, running a business or being an amazing trial lawyer. And to do those two things really well, that's just really hard.
Well, I am not saying I do them really well.
Well, I for sure know you're doing the trial really well, given your last verdict. I don't know enough about your business to comment, but it sounds like you guys are doing great. So
we're happy and we're growing, and we talked about it as we were walking in. We're busy. Yeah. And I say internally, busy is a good thing, because busy means we're doing good work and we have opportunities to make a difference. And so, I have no complaints, but I also don't do it alone. So that's a big part of it. And I have great partners who are amazing trial lawyers and lawyers in their own right, and being able to put us all together, and I can lean on them and they can lean on me, and vice versa, I think is really the secret sauce.
Now, do you think that a partnership is it 6 total partners including you, or there's 7?
6 including me.
6 including you. Okay. Do you think that that's in a way easier to manage than a partnership of 2, where they could just bump heads and then there's like no one to kind of like step in and give a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th point of view? Or is it tougher to have that many people involved? Because like, at least from like our experience on, say, like developing a website, for example, when there are 6 partners involved, it's almost impossible, because everybody has a different subjective opinion.
Right.
But I also have noticed that solo practitioners, they struggle in ways that they don't know that they're struggling, because they really have no energy to balance them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
And if you've like, I think it was Napoleon Hill who said like 2 minds create a 3rd invisible mind. And I have you read Think and Grow Rich? And I really believe that. Like, I really, 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 like, I have seen it happen so many times. Like, I think that there is such a huge benefit to partnerships, assuming people can check their ego a little bit at times. I'm not even asking all the time, right?
Right.
So like, what has been your experience with that?
I don't know that it's binary. And what I mean by that, I don't know that having less or more partners makes it any easier or more difficult. I think it really has to do with the connective tissue amongst them. And so if the great benefit that we've had is, I think I said this earlier, no one of us is the same. And that is an added benefit because, like Napoleon Hill, and you talk about masterminds and being able to share ideas. And
I think that's where the term mastermind was coined, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it really turns into our own little mastermind group. You also need some sort of a structure to make sure that decisions are happening, right? Because it can be too many cooks in the kitchen if you don't have a clear understanding of how things go. And we've, I think, blended that well. I sort of view myself as chief vision officer in the way that, trying to map the course, and the benefit that we have as a firm is that everyone that we have involved right now has the same vision, and that's why they came into the firm or why they're still at the firm. And so if we're having a website conversation, it's not as difficult because there is a common vision amongst us to be able to say, okay, we trust Kevin to go out and be our point of contact on that because we all share in the same vision here. If we're hiring and we don't have enough time for a partner or somebody to meet with somebody even though they want to, it's okay. We know what we're looking for as a group. We've outlined that. We know who is one of us at BB Trial and we know who's not. And so we don't have to all be part of that decision. And so
that makes a lot of sense, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed there are firms where like everybody has to be on no matter what. And it doesn't matter if that pushes the call out 2 months for what, and it doesn't even have to be a website conversation, whatever the conversation is, right? But then there are firms that are like, I've been put in charge of this. And if like the other 2 people can join, great. If they can't, they can't. But you're also speaking like a true CEO visionary, right? Like, and my question is like, did you learn this during undergrad? Like, are you pulling from that, or did you feel like undergrad didn't teach you much? Like, I know it's not an MBA, but
yeah. It wouldn't be right for me to say I'm not because it's part of my life experience either way. I think the nuts and bolts of the operation, I certainly lean on the business degree and understanding accounting and understanding sort of different management styles or being introduced to those concepts. I am a nerd and an avid reader and consumer of information. And so we've talked about Think and Grow Rich. I have a library of books of things that I've tried to pick up from other people's experiences.
Like what? Tell me, what are some books that have really impacted you?
In this space, I think Jim Collins's books have been great. He writes Good to Great is one of his books, and Built to Last. Those were really transformative for me. Even, I don't even remember who wrote, there's a book on management on terms of achieving certain goals. Oh man, it's a tech guy that wrote it that was really helpful for me in terms of being able to think through the actual process of decision making so that I didn't get in the way of stuff, or to help identify when somebody's getting in the way of certain decision making. It's hard to think of.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, but it's Principles is a great book. Is one that I recommend to a lot of people by Ray Dalio, who's in the financial space. And that book, to give it credit, really informed and inspired me to think of a place of work in our legal world that has what he called an idea meritocracy. And we try to enforce that at our firm, which is, doesn't matter if you're a partner, an associate attorney, a paralegal. If you've got a good idea and it's a good idea, we're going to use it. And so we need you to say it. My paralegals, the ones closest to me, they have authority to tell me I'm wrong and to tell me I'm being an ass if I'm being an ass, which doesn't happen too often.
I can't imagine that.
But
You seem really
sometimes
nice.
But the whole point of that is to say no one person has a monopoly on good ideas, and no one person is, for some, a bestowed reason, knows exactly what to do in a circumstance better than another. And so let's encourage people to throw that stuff in the melting pot and come up with the best possible outcome on the backside of it, rather than, to your point, focus too much on the egos that are coming into it and saying, well, this idea came from XYZ person and therefore it's a better idea. Let's strip it from the source and really analyze what is it that somebody's proposing to do. And I think in a great example of that is the trial that we had. I think I have great ideas, right? But I also know that sometimes my ideas are over the top and may not land well. And I go to my partners and say, this is what I think I want to do. And they'll say, no, don't do that. It's not going to land well. And I say, okay, I'm not going to do that, and learn from those interactions. And so there's a ton of books. To answer your question, I'm a nerd in the idea that when we started this iteration of our firm in 2022, my goal ultimately was to build something that was bigger than myself. And I don't know that is achieved as much in our space at personal injury lawyers and plaintiffs firms as much as I think would be good for the industry. I think a lot of times it's centered around something or someone.
Okay.
And
you mean egos?
And I.
Why are you smiling? Say it.
Yeah.
Be like,
yeah.
what?
I have an ego too.
We all
right?
have egos.
So I.
But
yeah.
And Joe Fried and I talk about ego a lot, and I need to have him back on. But I personally don't think the ego's a bad thing. I think it's just, can you check it?
Right.
Can you grow, can you recognize oh, my ego's engaged. I need to come down, hear this person out, or I don't want to make ego-driven decisions. So like you said, you had a great idea. You thought it was a great idea. But you had the emotional IQ to go to your partner, say, what do you think about this? And be open to them saying, nah, we don't think that's a good idea. And then you listen to them.
Right.
Because a lot of people ask for advice, but they never, they don't take it, right? They're just looking to hear, yes, that's a great idea. We love it. It sounds to me like your firm has a lot of collaboration and really fosters that environment of we're all going to collaborate. And I forget, but there was a really good story. I think it was Amazon that employees could, they had this idea box of sorts. And they had one of their best ideas come from some random employee.
Right. I think there's a great book called The Ego is the Enemy.
Yep. Yes.
That I have.
My husband's read it.
I have it on audiobook because I think I listen to it probably once a year. And it's because I do recognize that I do have a big ego.
And then is that the one that talks about how your brain will make up stories?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
in absence of information, your brain will make up a story. So somebody doesn't take your call and you're oh, they're mad at me because I said whatever, right? And it's no, your brain is just doing that. That's
right.
Survival.
Right. And so, yeah, to your point, ego's not a good thing or a bad thing. Ego oftentimes, I think, is what drives people to be successful. And so in some way, ego's good. You want people at your firm to have ego. You also want folks to be able to appreciate when a personal ego is getting in the way of a greater good.
Right.
And that's a hard balance. It's not an easy thing, right? Which is why I listen to the book every year, because it's something that I struggle with. But, if you're not struggling with it, you're not trying to learn from it. is sort of my thought process. If you're letting it run rampant and do whatever it wants to do, then that's when you get yourself into trouble.
I want your book list.
Okay.
Like when you're like maybe on the plane and like you're not under pressure, I want you to send me your book list.
I'll do that. Okay.
Cool. And we'll do a reel. We'll post it.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for
Thanks for having
joining me. Finally, I mean, you like canceled on me like 20 times.
You canceled on me once.
And you canceled on me once. So we're even.
We're even.
I did it on purpose.
We made it happen. Third time's the charm.
Yep.
Hopefully another time.
Of course. Anytime. You're welcome anytime. Thank you so much to Kevin for everything he shared with us today. If you found this story valuable, please share it with someone you want to see succeed. Subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave a 5-star review. It goes a long way to help others discover the show.